Good morning, welcome. Today's session is cloud video ready to specify. We've got, I'm Benjamin Butchko with Butchko ESI, part of the advisory board for Consult. Want to, certainly as everyone else, appreciate y'all coming, contributing today. The idea for this session is the panelists have a lot to offer. My role is referee to try and keep everybody playing nicely together, but the idea is not that we want to have one-way communication, so certainly questions, insights to share that further the conversation during the presentations appreciated. If we need to adjust a little bit and refine, that's fine, but we've got an hour, 15 minutes, and about 355 slides, so everybody should be in good shape. This is the first group session, so this is after the hangover recovery session for some of y'all. But actually, Ray came up with this session, pretty excited about some of the thoughts that the gentlemen up here have to share. So without further ado, introduce our panelists, and with the full bios are, I think, in the overall program, but Tim Coon with Eagle Eye, Josh Cummings with VTI Security, and Lance Kelson with Tiger Technology. So we've tried to get a combination of folks that are from the manufacturer side with a variety of views and insights, and then with Josh and his team that actually get to transition it from the manufacturer into action. So, and then myself as a consultant, but this is not the Ben Butchko show. So, contrary to what some of y'all may think, knowing me, but anyway, that's our key, and we do want to keep it a little bit lively. The idea is, my rule is, and trying to be metrics driven, is that we want to make sure everyone has a goal and an objective. The objective is to have a good time and to share information. If you guys learn, that's your choice, but the folks up here, they get to have the choice to have fun and share. So whether you guys pick the same metric, that's up to y'all. Anything you want to kick off before we move into the content, gentlemen?
Just don't make him mad. Just don't make him mad.
Yeah. Hear no evil, see no evil, have no fun?
Exactly.
Okay. So our session overview, the one piece is this is not what is Cloud 101. We will talk a little bit about just cloud for context and kind of like one of the manufacturers I spoke with a few months ago, and we talked about, I corrected him of instead of just one type of cloud, I said there were 8 different kinds, and that was really a nice conversation until he figured out it was kind of a farce. So we're not going to talk about what is cloud. We will talk about the deployment of video in the cloud, different concepts to include, and really it's the trade-offs. So we are working off of some case studies, but the idea is not, it is from soup to nuts. Are we actually solving a problem? So if you've got specific problems that we aren't touching in these case studies, let's make sure we address that and let everyone bring it through. So what is cloud? Tim, you want to give us a little bit of a start on this one?
Yeah, so as you can see there, we have the NIST definition up there. It really allows you, your end users, or you if you're going to be doing it, to kind of take that server-based that you're doing and remote that and let that be somebody else's headache, that it can be easily expanded and contracted as they grow and change their business. A lot of areas where we play in, you're going to see the SaaS, which is software as a service, and then the VSaaS, that's more of a coined term, I think, just for video, software as a service, and then you've got the other deployment that you're going to see, which is more of a hybrid, where you might have on-site storage with that cloud backup involved in that. So those are kind of the world that we'll mainly play in, I think, in the video side of this.
Perfect. Anything else before we get too far in?
Well, just kind of playing off the smart technology builder, that I was thinking, listening to them talk about some of the pain points, some of the issues, that language barrier between different systems, looking at maybe a cloud type system provides, especially if you're using the API that's pretty open, that allows that language barrier to go down. Also, just being in the cloud, having multiple systems maybe in the cloud, I know that has its own issues, and we'll talk about that, but that might help with that connectivity as well. So cloud might be not the ultimate answer, but a part of that smart building technology.
Perfect, thanks. So,
just going to ask a question of those in the room. Who's being asked to design, specify systems in the cloud today? All right, good.
how many of those have been successful? How many of them were failures? Or kind of a mix?
A couple successes.
Okay.
Have you seen a rise in that since COVID taking place, people moving out of the office? Yeah, we have too. A lot of the systems that are being deployed, it's hard to manage them when they're on site. And so end users are looking for a way to be able to see them, to manage them, to view their video remotely. It's much harder if it's on-prem. So we've seen a big push to the cloud, and often it's a knee-jerk reaction, right? So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of that best practice in preparing for moving to the cloud, because if you just decide today that you want to do that, you got a lot of work to do, right? You got to figure out what that means.
I also think that it really depends on the camera count.
Yes.
So those have been my experiences. The larger the amount of cameras, sometimes the cloud is not an option. So.
Yeah, I would imagine everybody in this room really understands that one size doesn't fit all, right? And there's no one solution to every issue, and so we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the biggest things that I've been doing this for about 4 years now, specializing in any of the clouds that are out there. And funny that Butch should say that, because we deal typically with 8 primary clouds. There are actually different cloud providers out there offering different things depending on what your workflow is. But the biggest thing that I find now, it's absolutely critical to really truly understand what the workflow is, what they're trying to accomplish, right? That's just very, very, very key. Because there are a lot of different ways you can skin the cat these days. And, the 3 of us will talk about various different things here. Some of them are everything in the cloud. Some of them are this hybrid approach as well. And it is definitely a case where one size does not fit all. So.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and just a couple of thoughts as the comment about really camera count and the like comes in. Because we're recording it, what I'm going to try and do is regurgitate back the questions that y'all ask, so we have it for the recording. If y'all speak up loudly, then remember I'm an Aggie, so I listen really slow. But we'll try and keep that so we have continuity across the program. But we really do, I'm going to try and keep that where it doesn't fumble to where it diminishes the conversation and the exchange. So if you'll help us, that'll help the program and keep Ray and the folks that aren't able to sit in, that can listen later, stay clued in and get more out of the program. So our collection of cloud considerations. Lance, you want to start off with some of the things we've talked a bit here, but...
It might help if you don't mind. Could you go forward to one of the hybrid things, and let me just, we can talk a little bit about a couple things, and then Tim can talk maybe about more holistically in the cloud. I can talk a little bit about the hybrid. So
I love this dynamic approach right from the beginning. Great, dynamic conversation.
Yeah. So now, and the reason I want to do this for everybody, because we really do want that interactivity here in the questions, right? So there are a couple different approaches. Real quickly, this is something that is a hybrid approach that, again, the reason I'm here is more as a resource for you guys. If a cloud question comes up, just because I have a lot of arrows in my back from dealing with all of the different cloud manufacturers and cloud providers, and I have to say, Tiger is not compensated at all. We do not have any relationship with any of the cloud providers, period. We don't offer cloud storage itself. We are strictly the enabling layer. We happen to work with BCDs, so for instance, the BCD appliances, when they go out, they're cloud enabled with the Tiger software. But what does hybrid really mean? I think it's really important. I want you guys to know that this is possible, because most people frankly don't know that you can do this, right? Because it's just come onto the market within the last couple of years. So generally, just so that you get it, and again, questions are fine, but inside of whatever the recording server is, and this works pretty much across all VMSs, there's a layer of software. It's software only. Some of you might know about hardware gateways. This is effectively a software gateway. It takes 2 minutes to install, but that software sits at the Windows file system level. It literally adds capability to NTFS and allows this normal recording server, right, to automatically understand all the cloud capabilities. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to learn anything and all the rest. So when we talk about hybrid for this discussion, that's what it is. It's the open architecture capability of just saying, I can take an existing VMS and all of a sudden it can talk to the cloud. So effectively what you get is the recording server can become a very small buffer, whatever size you want. We can talk about that later. But that allows you to extend the storage capacity into the cloud. Why? Why would you even want to do this in the first place is a huge question, right? Number one, a lot of people are now coming to all of us saying, I've been told I have to keep my data for a year in the cloud because it's safer. Well, it is safer, that is true. It has more nines of data durability and all that kind of stuff, which we can, talk about. But you can have a perfect mirror image in the cloud, but you can also, the secondary issue is minimizing the footprint of what you have on premises and literally allowing the VMS to think it's looking at a petabyte on premises, but it may only be looking at 1 terabyte. Literally, it could be a 1 terabyte SSD that can be extended into the cloud. So I wanted to just get that out of the way for context. So that's what we mean on the hybrid, and you might want to talk more on your more all-in.
Yeah, I guess. Sure. We can.
So that's one approach, right?
Question or no?
Oh, they got it.
We'll see.
Test. All right, cool.
I think it's important too, just real quick, to talk about the fact that there's multiple approaches to hybrid, right? So what Lance just talked about is a software enablement, right, to reach the cloud with an on-premise system. But hybrid could mean, a camera at the edge with an SD card in it, streaming straight to the cloud. Or in the case of Eagle Eye, it could mean a gateway, right, on site.
Yep.
And then streaming the video from there with buffering. So there's multiple approaches to hybrid, and a lot of it has to do with camera count, like this question over here asked earlier, depending on what your camera count is, it might make sense to put a gateway in place, or it might make sense to stream an individual camera straight to the cloud, right?
And there are cases that we've run into where somebody may be more rural, they just do not have the upload bandwidth, right? Because at the end of the day, none of us can fix physics yet.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someday.
Ben's working on it.
Oh, that was Ben.
Physics, yeah, physics.
But so we've got people that we have to come up with a custom approach where some cameras are going to go here to maybe it's a cloud target. Other cameras, because of bandwidth, may go across a VPN to a private data center, and other cameras could go to just whatever a local storage that might be there, because they each may have different levels of importance. As far as retention period is a huge one we'll talk about in a bit. Retention period, or just how important is it to get it? How fast do you need to get that data back? All of those things have to be considered, right?
Yeah, so kind of going through a little bit of recap of what we talked about. You've got your direct, from the camera. There's downfalls to that. Sometimes they're proprietary. If you want to change your recording, you have to change cameras, that sort of thing. So you've got to always look at everything. There's going to be trade-offs back and forth, so it's always good to kind of look at it holistically. So you've got your direct to the cloud from the camera. In this case, and I'll just say this is some Eagle Eye stuff here, but we have tried to cover some of those architectures. One that we have is the cloud managed VMS. So this is an instance where maybe your end user wants everything in the cloud, so we put appliance on site to give you a couple of days of buffering, and that's typically for bandwidth management, and also if there's some internet outages, because we know internet goes down, and that's a critical thing. So we try to cover that. Then the next one down would be more of probably a hybrid solution where you could do local storage. that device, that appliance could act kind of as a bridge as well as far as buffering to allow for that video to get up to the cloud. So that's one scenario. And then we also have another scenario, which is kind of going back to the bridge scenario, where if you have an on-site system and maybe you've reached the capacity of the storage and you want to expand that, or maybe they've just decided, you know what, we need to back that up to the cloud, we can throw one of our appliances on there and be able to get that up that way. So that's kind of the way Eagle Eye approaches some of that stuff.
So Tim, with that being, that's the spread and the breadth of the Eagle Eye solution and how it ties in with what Lance was talking about. Are there other options that are common in cloud providing that, does this match and represent between what the two of y'all have talked pretty well, the breadth of what's in the market?
Well, there are other ones. I'll jump in. For instance, Milestone and Amazon a couple of years ago, they announced something that is basically putting the Milestone recording server into what's called EC2, which is Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, right? So that's effectively the compute part of the cloud. At least 4 of the major cloud providers also offer compute storage in addition to the storage like S3 or Glacier or Azure, things like that, right? So the difference, though, was alluded to. If I've got 3,000 cameras, and if the recording server is in the compute part of the cloud, what's the number one reason you have a recording server? It's to make sure you never lose any frames on the cameras, right? That's what it's designed for. If you put that in the cloud, and if I've got, let's just say my example, 3,000 cameras streaming or trying to get to that cloud, what happens if John Deere or Caterpillar cuts my fiber, right? The cameras aren't going to make it. Now, of course, somebody's going to say, oh, yeah, but you've got an SD card in the camera. Well, okay, for a bit, that's going to be okay, right? But the bottom line is there are a lot of people out there, a lot of companies out there where it's just not practical to have diverse fiber going, or whatever the connection is, probably on diverse carriers with some kind of a BGP or something to make sure that you can fail over all the traffic without missing a frame of video. That's a tough order. It's a tall order. It's very difficult to do that. So what I was going to say is that approach, although it's out there, it's not very popular. It's just not, because it's impractical right now. I'm not saying you can't do it, because you absolutely can. Another one I'll bring up, because all of you know probably, Arcules is another one. Again, on smaller installations, that can make a lot of sense, and it can actually fall into or be assimilated, if you will, into a Milestone system as well, because they're sister companies, obviously, from Canon. So there are other approaches like that, and I'm sure there are more too. But
some common ones.
Yeah, it's back to weighing what you're able to do, what your budget is, what your infrastructure is. Do you have fiber in your area, or do you have the connectivity in your area that's going to allow you to maintain the level of connectivity you've got to have for this, based on your preferences or based on the requirements you have, so.
And Josh, and then Tim as well, but how does this spectrum of options fit when you're the go-between between the folks providing equipment and the consumers that are writing you the check and expecting wonderful things to happen?
Yeah. Well, you got to work with the end user, right? So as an example, we've got some higher ed end users where their IT group is saying, we want to move everything to the cloud, right? And they're security folks. They don't understand what that means to move it to the cloud. So often, a lot of what we're doing is just helping educate, right? Helping them understand what it means. What's it going to take to move all of these cameras to the cloud? What do you have in place today? Doing cost estimates and whatnot. But just trying to walk them through that, because they really don't necessarily know what cloud means. And what that's going to take to do what the IT group is asking. They know that they've got this directive, they're being asked to do something, but they don't know how to get there. And so for us, it really starts just at the very beginning of the process. Just let's sit down and have a conversation. Let's talk about, why are you interested in moving to the cloud? What is the purpose of it? Is it because of, retention times? Is it because of, server utilization on site? What's the driving factor for that? And then just starting to work towards a solution. But we always try to approach it from the mindset that there's no one right answer when you walk in the door, right? You don't know what the answer is until you've talked to the end user. And after you talk to them, you may have to talk to them a few more times before you start to understand what the right answer might be, or what the potential right answers might be to that solution.
Yeah, I think, Josh, you kind of set in a position similar to what a specifier has to go through. You've got to sit there, what is your goal? Walk them through it, maybe some education. Everybody watches CSI. They think a camera, just placing cameras. Oh, I want to be able to see it. No, you're not going to be able to do that. Kind of, I always divert back to, I never ask them where they want the camera. I always ask them what they want to see, and then I guide them to say, hey, this is going to be your best place to do it, or this is the camera you use. So same way with the cloud, you kind of got to go through that whole process.
Great, appreciate it. Let's tap on just some of the, what are the considerations as we started moving in, and Tim, you mentioned as well as Josh, of what's important. So some of these we've started to address, but where do we start? What are the right questions that consultants need to ask and start getting into specs, because y'all are going to be asking these same questions through. So this is just a starter set, but where can we expound on those, and what do they mean? What are we trying to get from these questions rather than just asking the question because it feels good?
Well, I think it's important to start off by trying to set a level of understanding of what cloud means, right? If you're talking with an end user, what is their understanding of what cloud is, and have a discussion around that before you talk about what the solutions are, because maybe they don't really understand, what cloud means and what type of solution that might present. And so just making sure that everybody's on the same page before you start diving into the possible options.
Yeah, so taking the second question there, as a service model supported, so talking to them about the cost for that, the benefits to them. Maybe they don't have to have as much IT staff because they're moving that to the cloud. Same way with when they're designing the building, their MDFs, IDFs don't have to be as large. They're going to save money on the electric for those rooms, the cooling for those rooms. So kind of talking about total cost of ownership and how the cloud can reduce that building cost for them. So.
Another issue sometimes that we come up against is if it's something that's brand new, of course you can evaluate a lot more options. But we have a lot of people that have an existing system, but all of a sudden somebody walks in and they says, look, your mandate's not 45 days on retention, it's 60 days. I literally have somebody that's 14 years right now, okay? I have somebody that's in a municipality that something happened. I still honestly don't know what happened, but they're kind of under scrutiny now. So guess what? 1-2 year mandate on all their video. So all of a sudden the retention in a lot of cases is what drives this. And if you, again, I'm going to talk just because I'm more familiar with the hybrid approach, but if that's the case, if you have a hybrid approach that's been set up, you instantly can just literally inside of a minute, you can say, okay, I want to change my retention policy on the VMS, and it automatically scales into the cloud. So I can change a retention policy without touching the hardware in a hybrid approach. A little difficult to do that, obviously, if you're not running that way.
Yeah, because then you got to go, do you have rack space? I've got to order the equipment. How long is that going to take? Supply chain's a big thing right now for everybody. Obviously. So that's one headache that you don't have to worry about. That's
or lack of supply chain.
Or lack of supply chain. Yes.
Yeah, we had
the lack thereof.
On the complexity issue, we had an insurance company kind of in the middle of the U.S. and they got a quote, and I'm sure it would have been great for a lot of people. It was a very, very expensive quote, but they chose, instead of doing a massive CapEx expenditure, they switched everything. They used that as impetus to switch to an OpEx model where they're paying, in their case, they're using Amazon, and it's a combination of S3 and Glacier because the way this hybrid can work is without you doing anything based on your local traffic patterns, we can move the data to the hot or the immediate access of the cloud, and then after 5-6 months, if it makes more sense, we can migrate or transition it. It's really not moving it, it's just transitioning it to the archive tier in the cloud. A lot of people don't know this, but the archive tier in the cloud these days is down to $1 a terabyte a month. I've done a lot of work, unfortunately, from some of those arrows in my back with LTO data tape, and I know you have too, but anyway, we've done a lot of things with that. This is a godsend, honestly, that you have an archive tier in the cloud, that if you have a long retention period, you can drive your costs way down because you can minimize how much is going to be in that immediate access tier of the cloud. you can let us transition the data into the archive part at $1 or less per terabyte per month. That's the only way you can get, other than tape, that's about the only way you can get to a multi-year retention policy. And I'm not kidding, I've got at least 10 people right now that are north of a year. And it's usually for some strange thing that's happened. Cannabis industry, a lot of people bring up. That one, we probably all know why. But there are other strange things that are just popping up that, as I said, like the case where there's some legal issue. I don't even know exactly why, but they come in and the guy's pulling his hair out because he says, I've got to go to a 1-year retention. What do I do?
So Tim or Josh, with those issues of variable retention and changing retention, outside where Lance has talked that hybrid model for storage, how does that fit with the classic VSAS or other options? Is there a mix and match of hybrid in the cloud for a full service play? Or how is that being addressed to come in with some of those issues which do vary with retention rates that do change as regulations change or other reasons? Anything?
Yeah, from an Eagle Eye standpoint, I mean, we have that same flexibility, click of a button, change your retention, reduce it. One of the models that I've seen that's pretty popular is a multi-tenant building. So if you're the building owner, base building owner, you can offer that video as a service to those individuals as they come in, tack it onto their lease price. When they exit that lease, as the base building owner in the past, you're stuck now that you've had to invest on a bunch of on-premise stuff, so you have all this stuff sitting there that you paid for. With this model, you turn those cameras off, you quit paying for it until maybe you lease that space out again. So it's very up and down. So it's very flexibility, on demand. You mentioned expand retention. You can also reduce retention to zero and quit paying for it. So that really works in what we've seen with the COVID stuff. People have exited those big buildings. Now, if you did the old traditional system, you're stuck with all these servers. It's recording empty hallways. People start moving back in. Is that software up to date now? Do you have to go back in and spend a bunch of money to kind of refresh things, make sure it's ready for people to take over those spaces, that sort of thing. So with us, it's all, with the software being updated every time you open up your web browser, your mobile app, we take care of all that cost that might be involved.
Great. Any other questions at this point as we keep running from the rest of the crowd? Yes, ma'am.
Good question. So in terms of the third question there about like the cybersecurity profile, who's responsible for so there's the security of the cloud, but then there's security of the data in the cloud, and then security of the data in transmission. Who's responsible for that whole life cycle of the security within the cloud?
So let me repeat the question so make sure we capture it. Really on the cybersecurity issue is what's the bifurcation or trifurcation of security of data in transit, data at rest when it's in the cloud, data when it's still on premises, and the overall strategy. Is that the correct? Okay. Gentlemen, who wants to jump in first? Josh?
Well, so my experience has been, depending on the application, typically the data in the cloud is the end users. They're responsible for it, and if you read the lease from the cloud provider, they're going to tell you the same thing. Amazon or Google, they're not going to take ownership or responsibility for the security of your data. So if you're working in like a VSAS model, let's say like Eagle Eye or others, right, they may have some ownership in the protection of that data in the cloud. And depending on what the solution is, right, if you've got a bridge on site and that bridge is talking to your VSAS solution, maybe the encryption in transit is the VSAS's responsibility to own that. Yeah. But if you have an application where the end user is maybe streaming directly to the cloud, that transmission of the data might be on the end user to make sure that that's secure. And depending on what kind of pipe they're using, are they going across VPN? Do they have dedicated fiber? Or are they just sending it out to the internet? And it's making its way up to the cloud. And so there's no one straight answer to that, I guess, Antoinette. It really depends on how you architect the solution and what products you're using and how you're getting there.
Yeah, and the point there, you mentioned it, and we certainly, why don't we step into it at this point, is how much do you need to pay attention to the terms and conditions of your contract, and how much of that is exposed to even start addressing? How far do you dig to know what to look for, how to look for, when to look for it? Lawyers usually have a reputation because they earn it, so now it's y'all's turn.
Well, on my side of it, to speak to that a little bit, again, I'm not trying to absolve myself from any responsibility, but we're kind of out of the equation a bit. But from dealing with all the different cloud providers, I agree exactly with what Josh said, but for instance, the requirements are still key, obviously. For instance, I come across people that saying I have to have FedRAMP certification, NIST, FSMA, et cetera, HIPAA, of course. Most of the clouds, and again, we know a lot about a lot of the clouds. However, you do have to read the fine print. So based on your requirements, absolutely you have to go to Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, Wasabi, RStore, Seagate, et cetera, right? You go to all these guys and figure out exactly what they do and don't do. Some offer things like the advanced certifications. I think most of you know that when data is on premises, assuming you're using HTTPS, it is always encrypted in transit at least. All the cloud providers, almost all to my knowledge, allow you to do secondary encryption if you want to, server-side encryption that's fully supported by these models. I'm sure they are here as well. So there are a lot of things you can do there. But the other one I want to bring up real quickly is data sovereignty. Not as much an issue here, but I tell you, in Europe, it's massive. Yep. We have a big medical-related deployment in Germany. Data sovereignty is everything over there, and a lot of other European countries too. But what's happened, most of the big guys now offer that literally, like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, IBM, they have ways to make sure that if you're in Germany, for instance, they keep your data in Germany, and it never goes to any edge servers or copies of your data go anywhere else. That's very important. But again, back to what you said, you do have to really dig in, because I keep up okay, but there are so many things that are changing, and over the last 2 to 3 years, I am amazed how much has changed. Because I mean, this is all new. Literally over the last 2 to 3 years, this stuff has gone from almost nothing to up here, and it's continuing, but it's rapidly evolving and changing, especially on some of the certifications and safety, I'd say.
Excellent. Yeah, lots of topics in there. So why don't we start addressing some of these issues within the context of some of the use case examples, and what are the trade-offs as to the items we've mentioned relating to the retention, the privacy, the bandwidth, these other items that have been mentioned, and as well as the regulations aside from those items of who can see, who can touch, when, where, and how. But with the utility case, just some of the key elements. Josh, for some of the ones that you've addressed, how do the questions and the starting solution discussions go based on those various use cases, and if we need to change more from the outside?
Sure.
This is a place to start.
Yeah. Well, I would say our biggest challenge that I've experienced in utilities, critical infrastructure, is connectivity. We deal with a lot of end users who have power stations, power generation, right? And they've got sites out there that have less than, a T1. They've got sites out there that have barely any internet connectivity to them. And so that's presented a real challenge for us. Typically our critical infrastructure customers, they've got NERC, SIP requirements that they've got to have around how they protect that data. But one use case that we had is, I don't know if a lot of folks are working in the energy sector, but some of these co-ops have these really weird agreements, right? So it could be on, say, public land. There might be a National Parks Association that's in there, but then you've got multiple energy groups that own this property, and it's not very clear what's going on and who owns what, and sometimes I think it's written on a napkin how that all happens. But they need to give people visibility to, say, a camera, at a location, right? We had an example for one of our energy customers, just that very remote location. They've got a very small, facility there. They have no connectivity to it, and they need to give the national parks visibility to what's going on in the area because that's part of their agreement. And so for us, we had to come up with a solution where we put, they've got a large on-premise system, but for this specific application, we put one camera out with a cellular modem streaming to a VSAS so that they could give, access to the folks that needed to get access to this camera. And the other challenge we had was around, they don't share the same domain, they don't have the same logins, right? So this was a great opportunity for us to remove this one camera from their SIP requirements and some of the other things that would have heavily regulated what they had to do with it, and to put it straight to the cloud, give multiple folks access to that camera, and put in some cellular connectivity without them having to provide, a T1 or better to get to that site for that camera.
Yeah, so in that situation, you definitely want to educate your end user going, you're not going to be able to pull this up and have it running, full blast all day long. And I'm sure they're probably occasionally forensics, that kind of stuff. They're not using it as a, big video wall monitoring situation.
Actually, what they want to see with this is how much the snow is built up around this facility so that they can tell if they're going to be able to get to it and what kind of challenges they have. So they just want to still image every once in a while to see what the surrounding.
Yeah, so when it's snowing, they're probably going to look at it more. When it's not, they don't care. So, yeah.
Well, as you're prepping for hunting season, that 600 megapixel camera is the one you really want to see. Just saying, with full PTZ control.
That's right. Yeah.
But on 2G service. So
now,
it's all good.
Now, is that mounted on the tripod with the weapon to just go ahead and shoot?
That's my old nuclear weapons days. We're not going back there yet. But,
described all the ski resort cameras.
Yeah, the ski resorts, but that's for you got different game when you're looking at the ski resorts. So, excellent. How about, and certainly, yeah, I know there's other folks live in that critical infrastructure world on remote facilities as well, but how about the mixed pieces of banking, finance, healthcare, where a lot of remote facilities, major facilities, but it's a different context. How does the conversation change with those?
Yeah, I think cloud has really enabled us to be flexible, right? We've, say in healthcare, we got large hospital systems, they've got big on-premise, video. They're watching a lot of that. They might have a SOC where they're paying attention to that, but they've got clinics that are connected. They don't have the staff on site to really maintain that. They don't necessarily want to put a server on site. Can we take these cameras and stream them up to the cloud? And what we're really seeing the benefit now is, hey, we've got platforms that have multiple capabilities, right? So it's a hybrid approach. We're going to put storage on site here. We're going to put a gateway here. We're going to stream that to the cloud. The end user doesn't see the difference, right? They have one interface. They can pull up all of the cameras. They don't care how it gets there, and they don't care, what you have to go through to get it there, but they can see it all from one interface. And so that's been really helpful for us to have flexibility. And especially in healthcare right now, we're seeing that, workplace violence is really just driving the demand to put more video and more security in place. Nurses being killed and shootings taking place in clinics. So, we've seen a lot of hospitals pivot, and they're spending money on security, and they're being smart about it. They're not just throwing a big recorder on site and saying, hey, let's try to maintain this thing with no IT staff and no, security staff on site. Let's do something that's a little bit smarter.
We've seen a mix of that. I agree with that, but some people still, they just refuse to use the cloud. I'm sure you all know people like that. They say, no, I just don't want to play, right? And that's fine. So the hybrid approach and also other approaches, some of the cloud providers have made it so that you can buy the equivalent of the cloud storage. Almost everybody in the cloud uses what's called object storage these days, right? You can buy on-premises object storage. It's got the same level, very close to the same level of nines, like 11 nines of data safety or data durability. I have a hospital group, for instance, that they opted to still buy a whole bunch of hardware. They happen to have enough people that they can do that. But what they're doing is putting that, effectively it becomes a private cloud. And when we say that, we mean a private data center, their own managed data center with object storage hardware sitting on it. And they have the connectivity, in their case, enough to have multiple areas that have the cameras. All of the cameras are aggregated back to this private data center, and they can still use the same approach where the data movement software can automatically extend the local capacity of the recording servers, can automatically extend it into this private data center, either as an archive or just as a immediate access extension to the individual recording server. So we're really seeing a mix, and there's definitely, back to what we said at the very beginning, there's no one size fits all. I mean, we're seeing a lot of different approaches here.
Yeah, so kind of along the lines of the hospital and that sort of approach there of, I guess it'd be cloud replication or replication of data on site into the cloud. You run into maybe some hospital districts that are acquiring other hospitals. They have their own P&Ls. They have a SOC that they want everything back to. Hospital A is like, this is our system, don't touch it. I'm like, all right, fine, we'll put an appliance out there or get that video. You take your camera stream separately, not touch your system, pull that into an appliance, get it to the cloud, and now you have that central viewing that you want to do. One interesting one that came up, and this was down in South America, was looking at possibly doing that replication on a jail, because for some reason the video of that prisoner getting injured was deleted or not available, so they just started as a separate, kind of the watchers watching the watchers kind of deal. So keeping them honest, they did that scenario there. So lots of flexibility in that way.
So a lot of times when we talk about the different cloud options, it's the limitations are, as y'all mentioned, well, do I have enough bandwidth to get my cameras up to the cloud? How is that controlled? But when you really look at, and as you mentioned, Tim, there's really two sides of that equation. So how do you address those questions of, is it the feed side of the system from the video that's driving the cloud decision, or is it the consumption and distribution side of the resulting video? Where does that come into that performance and solving a true client problem, not just a technology framework which has the cool factor, but when we're trying to solve problems, where is that balance between the front side driver and the back side distribution driver? Tim, you want to start?
Yeah, I guess if I'm understanding the question, I would think you'd have to kind of go on both sides. One, on the feeding side of it is maybe, look at your megapixels that you're using. Do you really need that 4, 5, 10 megapixel to view a corridor? That might be more of a 1 or 2 megapixel camera. So to adjust it there. The bandwidth issue, now we all know that. We know fiber's starting to roll out. When is that going to happen? 5, 10 years before everybody's saturated? Maybe, I don't know. On the other side of it, yeah, it is on the distribution side, that's kind of an open, I know we have the flexibility to, through the cloud, be able to do that very easily, so you got to kind of weigh that.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the distribution side may not be as much of an issue if your users are dispersed, right? Mm-hmm. The challenge we have, if all the cameras are in one spot and they've all got to get to the cloud, you got one pipe to get there. But if your end users are dispersed, right, and they're viewing the cloud, they're doing that over their own internet connectivity, whether it's cellular or it's their own, fiber connection or whatnot. So that part's actually getting easier. I think it's the initial decision of, do we have enough bandwidth to get all this video up? How much video do we want to send up there? Do we only want to replicate the storage, or do we want to have the camera streams go directly up there? In the case of a higher ed customer that we had, that was kind of their opportunity to go back and talk to the IT group who had this mandate in place that we're going to move everything to the cloud. Well, okay, here's how much bandwidth that's going to take. And it really took the pressure off of them, right? As soon as they were able to say, well, you're going to need this much bandwidth to get all of this video directly to the cloud, then the IT group's got to go and say, oh, well, that's going to take us about 5 years. Well, guess what? Then the security group they got 5 years to figure this out, right? And to pick a platform, and they don't have to figure that out tomorrow, so.
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point. Things in the cloud are usually the stored video, sometimes live if you're logging in to view that, but the other side of that is having that option to maybe do the local area viewing. So if you've got that appliance on site, they can distribute it locally where your heavy user is, and maybe you're just doing cloud storage with a couple of people logging in to see live video. That's probably going to be a reasonable situation.
Great. We've got more to discuss. Any topics that are hot with outside? Yes, Jeff.
What does the chain of custody look like when something goes horribly wrong?
So the unloaded question of what's the chain of custody look like when something goes wrong, is that correct? Okay. Who wants the first with the hot potato?
What type of wrong?
Usually it does fall in your hands, right? Something went wrong, Josh.
Can we have a scenario?
Yeah.
You didn't get the phone call?
You're the integrator, yeah. Let me call the manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it depends on what we're talking about. When something goes horribly wrong, I think it's incumbent upon the team to figure out the solution. And I know Butch and I were having this conversation over breakfast the other morning. There's going to be adversity. There's going to be challenges that take place. And really what matters is how does everybody come together and solve the problem, and trying to avoid a situation or not work with partners who are just going to put their hands up and walk away. Right? So whatever the issue is, we just work through it. If it's a connectivity issue, how are we going to solve that? If it's a storage issue, how are we going to get more retention, and how can we scale up tomorrow to get 60 days instead of 45 days, right? So, it just kind of depends on what the scenario is, but it's about the team that you put together, and it's about sticking together and figuring it out.
So, and I'll do some interpretation with there, but as we run through the life cycle of this project, there's defining it, specifying it, going through procurement, deploying it, managing it, supporting it, and all through that life cycle. Well, that team is going to change. So since in many cases, from my perspective, it's the owner or the integrator that are the stuckies, if that's the most direct relationship, how do you deal with the team that's always in transition and isn't always there? Once it's been handed over, it's been running for 2 years. Who is the team anymore? And is that, so for like Tim, for your organization, are y'all still the team if you're selling through Josh?
Oh, yeah.
The same way with Lance through Tiger? How does that process go so that the pain of the end user, because they generally don't care, they're just pissed. They just want it solved. So how does that process work from y'all's perspective, and where do you need help from either the consultants that may or may not still be engaged, or helping lay the groundwork in the specification so that there is a lifeline of support after it's in and after the consultant is on the next project? How can that be improved? And this is not, I don't think this is just a cloud problem, but it has uniqueness of cloud.
Yep.
So can we help there?
I would just say the biggest part for us is making sure that you understand how the system is intended to be used from the end user. What is their intention? The worst possible situation for us is to put in an application, to put in a product, and to find out when you meet with the end user to train them that this doesn't do what they wanted it to do, right? And you've gotten all the way down the road to figure that happens a lot. A lot of the time when we're working off of a specification or we're designing a system, it's about, product specs. What can this camera do? What can this access control device do? How does this, this specific widget work? But there's not enough detail about, well, how is the end user going to use this? Is there a security operations center? Are they intending to have this loaded on 64 machines? And has anybody thought about the bandwidth of pulling video to 64 workstations? So working through all of those different pieces, because it puts us in a really awkward spot when we get to the point where we turn the system on and hand it over, and they say, well, how does it do this function? And you say, well, I didn't know you wanted it to do this function. So we've got this major gap in understanding of what was intended. And if we can communicate that all the way from the front end to the point where we've captured it in documentation from the end user and the integrator knows that that's what the intention is, then we can provide that up front and everybody doesn't look silly on the back end because we didn't really provide what the end user wanted. We just provided some really cool technology that doesn't meet their need.
Go ahead.
I want to add to that because, go ahead. Do what? What do you say?
So you don't like consultants?
No, I love consultants, actually. I think when we're working together and it really jives, that the end user is really happy with the application. But I think often through the process, right, if you're writing the spec and we don't have this direct connection to be able to interact and understand what's intended, that we miss a lot of that, right? Because maybe it's not necessarily captured in the paperwork, but maybe it's a process on the front end where the consultant and the integrator really sit down and talk about, hey, what's the intention? You've spent all of this time with the end user. You've captured everything that they want to do. We just may misinterpret what it is that's being intended because we're not getting that through the documentation. You've got all this experience in this conversation that maybe we don't know about. And so just closing that gap so that, we can be in the loop as well.
So I've got some insight to that. So what you're dealing with is something that we struggle as I used to do consulting. You could sit in meetings day after day and talk about it. They're not engaged. It's not every end user, but there's a lot of them that aren't engaged until the building's actually built and they start walking through it. And then they go, why is there a camera there? Well, you did. So yeah, it is a struggle. That's something that you got to just, as consultants, it's not like they're slacking. They're trying. It's the end user itself, if they're not completely engaged and really value the security and not just think of, it's another system, I'm not really too engaged with it. Or you have the wrong stakeholders that you can't get them in the room, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's an issue for sure.
So are the specifications that y'all see, do the specifications include that purpose, or does the specifications say what to install, or does it do both?
It's different every time.
Yeah, there's a little bit of both, depending on the specifier.
Yeah. I think some of them are written really well, and we understand what's intended at the end, and some of them are a boilerplate from a manufacturer, and there might just say or equal at the end. And I mean, that's my challenge. If it says or equal and we start going down products that maybe really aren't equal, but they say on paper that they can do the same thing. If this product doesn't have that one feature that you really intended for the end user, but this other one does, and they look similar on paper, and we don't know that that's the one feature that really matters, then we miss it and we put in a product that it's equal on paper, but it's not really equal.
Well, and one of the things I've seen, because I look at a lot of RFPs now, I mean, probably 10, 20 a week, just viewing, scanning for go, no go kind of thing, is when they start going into the cloud environment, being able to translate and make some changes to their specifications that make sense. So it's hard to do. It's kind of apples to oranges sometimes when you're looking at it. They say they want cloud, but they're talking about a lot of on-premise type traditional stuff. So it's, causes a lot of questions, which for me, it causes delays in saying go, no go. And then we're on a time crunch because I've got to get that, over to sales engineer for final blessing. Then we've got to find a reseller that's going to be, perfect for that, or a couple of them that'll be perfect for that vertical for that particular client. So now we're losing time on letting the reseller get a chance to actually put together a good proposal and make it accurate and match what they want. So to avoid that, it was hazy, so we bid this, turns out it's not what they actually wanted. It cascades down through it. So
I would say our challenge too is who are we as the integrator working for, right? If we're several layers removed from the end user and even from the consultant, then it's really difficult for us to be able to have that line of communication to talk about what's intended, right? If we're under a general contractor who's got an electrician under them, and maybe there's even a layer underneath that, the process to get answers to questions can be really lengthy, and we don't have that direct line of communication to be able to ask, hey, what did you intend to do here? I got to send a piece of paper through 5 different levels and hope that it comes back in a couple months. And at that point, depending on what the construction schedule is, everybody might have had to move on and just keep, moving forward. So.
And again, lack of supply chain. If we've got to change orders, that's just going to delay that as much, as well.
So is there collectively from the panel or from the audience, what is a path to bridging those challenges that y'all have brought up? How do we collectively make it better? Because it's related to cloud, as Tim, you mentioned, here is a cloud-specific specification that's based on key elements that are non-cloud specific, and so there's just a disconnect. Or looking at options and alternatives, which may include some spectrum of that total solo cloud hybrid. How do we help bridge that as a collective question? Anybody want to offer from outside here? Yeah.
Okay, so we push negotiations on a job to try to limit the layers, and the integrator ultimately is typically going to be there long after the GC's there. So one of the things that we argue in that negotiation is the longevity of the integrator, and maybe there's a way to pay the GC for the margin that he doesn't get because this guy's not going through the electrical or the low voltage to the electrical to the GC to the, right? So anyway, I don't know how you...
Yeah, I've seen that scenario where they get paid to manage, the GC's always going to squawk about that. That's not our guy, and they'll give them a little bone to kind of make that go down.
So for our, and I'll try and capture the synopsis, Ed, of one of the ways there to help is to keep as much of shorten that connection between the integrator deployment, the folks responsible for that, and the end user. And sometimes you have to get creative financially in discussions with those intermediate contractors so that they're not being penalized by allowing and facilitating that direct action and communication with the GC, with the electrician or electrical or some other. So certainly appreciate that. That's, I would say, probably more of a political challenge than a technical challenge, but it's part of part of our world. Any other thoughts there? Yes, sir.
It might also help bring in the customer's IT staff early on in the spec process, so the security spec isn't written to, say, cloud or on-prem. Now you get to deployment time, and okay, I need to put this stuff in the server room. Where is it? There's no server room. What are you talking about? Or, hey, we're going to stream 100 cameras up to the cloud. We need X bandwidth, and it's the first that they're hearing about.
So,
I know a lot of that's going to be on the customer side, but realizing now that everything with security is so intertwined with IT that they need to be installed right out of the gate.
So that early interaction with IT to bring up the issues, certainly, I think y'all would agree, making sure there's buy-in or understanding is important. How successful is that, and how can we collectively make that better from y'all's perspective? Because that to me sounds like another of, as Ed mentioned, it's a political issue and a cultural issue of, are the propeller heads going to talk with the knuckle draggers and vice versa?
Yeah, for sure.
That's actually what our afternoon session is all about, how to assess the readiness of the network and whether that's provided by the end user or what that looks like. So come this afternoon, we'll be talking about that.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, and the other part of this is the tools are changing now. As I said, this has all been coming on, the whole cloud readiness has been coming on very quickly. So what we've done is we've added, we've worked with BCD, for instance, on tools that at an early stage, we say not only is it H.264 or 265, how much motion on recording on motion versus frame rate normally versus low, medium, high, codec quality, all the things that you guys do all the time, but we've added another layer, which is how much bandwidth is going to be truly required to get this data on a regular basis up to a cloud provider or across a private network to your private data center or to whatever it is you want to extend it to. But that's critical, and we do that at a very early stage now, and we do involve the IT guys, at the earliest level to say, if you want to go to cloud, there are a lot of good reasons you may want to do that. Let's look and see if it makes sense for you. And we make sure we have that calculation right up front to tell them it's going to be the aggregate bandwidth that you're figured out for your recording server plus X% to make sure you can get that data up to the cloud and still be able to recover quickly from an outage. Because the whole thing, we haven't really talked about RTO and RPO, but the recovery time and recovery point objectives, the cloud can make that really, really fast. We haven't talked about that, but compared to a disaster on premises versus if you have a disaster on-prem, but you have a copy of the data in the cloud, there are ways that you can do that really fast recovery time and recovery point objectives. So it is important to bring it up early and have those discussions, because I've had some pretty short phone calls, right, where say, hey, you're going to need about a gigabit or something. You go, well, goodbye. I can't get it right now. Now, the contrary is, the other side of that is because of a lot of the different network connectivity, and you guys have been in various other sessions about that probably, it's getting less expensive and getting faster for a variety of reasons. So that's a good thing. And H.265 versus H.264, of course, that all helps this whole issue about is the cloud ready to specify.
So kind of to backtrack a comment on, he was talking about that direct relationship to the security group with the end user in construction, making that more streamlined and the communication a lot better. I think also as a specifier, I've noticed when I did projects where I had a direct communication to the end user and I wasn't part of an A&E team, things went a lot smoother because we had more control, we could talk to the reseller, we could talk to the end user, we didn't have those layers that we had to go through from a designer saying, hey, I need to get a meeting with, talking to the architect, I need to get a meeting with the IT group, the security group, facilities, let's go through all those with that. So I would say, the more as a specifier you can push to have that direct communication, probably going to be better for everybody overall.
Right. Then let's tip another subject that we haven't addressed yet, and that is we were talking about video in the cloud. What are those solutions? Well, what about the situation where I want to have an integrated solution? I may actually want to have something integrated in with alarm system, access control, other emergency management systems, other data systems. How is that different or impacted within a cloud environment, and what are the pathways to success?
Well, I would just say, aside from video, the other platforms are, in my opinion, much more easy to adopt to cloud, right? If we want to put access control in the cloud, we want to put intercom or voice in the cloud or intrusion in the cloud, that's easy. That's the quick stuff. The video is often the one that you need to put a lot more planning into, make sure that you don't do, incorrectly. But I think there's a lot of interoperability in the cloud, and
what about on-premise versus cloud too, where the systems are different?
Yeah, and
how does all that fit? I guess because it's an unbounded problem in many ways. Where do you start? And Josh, you were on that path, so I didn't mean to cut you off. But
well, yeah, to your point, is it a greenfield opportunity, or do you have legacy products, right? And I think the biggest challenge we have is with legacy products that aren't necessarily intended to be interoperable with the cloud. And so, are you going to have to make a wholesale change on site to be able to talk to a cloud platform, or is there some sort of intermediary that you can use? So there's a lot of discovery that's got to take place.
Yeah, talking about the legacy versus cloud, when you've got on-prem, you have to, if you want that in real time, that exchange of data, you're going to have to keep an open connection between that on-premise, whatever it is, to that cloud. So, I think as people start moving more stuff to the cloud, then cloud to cloud, it's a lot easier to do those integrations. It's if they're using just SDK, they don't have an API, that kind of thing, that hampers some of that integration pieces. And then you've got the business model. Do I want to talk to my competitor? Or, if I've got my own video, do I want to talk to another cloud video? Maybe we'll just do our own, that kind of thing. So, so there's the technology side and then just the business case side of it that you got to get over. So,
kind of one other quick thing, the best practices that we've found is we don't care what the data is. If it's camera data, you're right, we always have to worry about more bandwidth things to get it there. We have a lot of people that are taking snapshots of access control data, other databases. It could be an external old Isilon NAS. It doesn't matter what the data is. From a data movement to cloud perspective, we don't care what it is. We really don't. So you can have, what we're seeing right now is people are typically, the best practice would be to have a different bucket or container, they're called, in the cloud, right? So if it's Amazon, they call them buckets. If it's Azure, they call them containers. But if you have a different container in the cloud, you still have one account. So this is easy stuff to do. You set up an account, but you can have as many buckets or containers as you want up in the cloud. But we tend to segregate the data. So you have your access control backups or your SQL backups or whatever it is, go to a separate bucket. It's really just for your peace of mind and a much faster disaster recovery. Because if you don't commingle your data up in these different cloud buckets, it's really easy if you have some kind of an error, some kind of a loss. You just literally can reconnect the computer back to the cloud, index all of that data immediately. You don't even have to pull all the data back. So So you can have a local data set on a computer where there's actually no actual data there. It's just the placeholder indexes, if you will, for the data that's in the cloud. And when you need it, you just click on it and it comes back. So that capability exists in doing this, and it's making it a lot easier now when you have these disparate data sets all over the place. You can still at least get them backed up very, very easily to the cloud. So that's like the first step we see.
I think we've seen too that our manufacturer partners are building in interoperability, right? So in their latest versions of software, they're working to build connectors so that if we want to, connect to a cloud service, or we need to start talking to applications that are in different places, we're seeing that they're working on that. Or honestly, a lot of them are rewriting their software right now. If they've traditionally been an on-premise type of application, to be able to run in the cloud and to be in a container, and thankfully they're starting to get to the point where they can become operating system agnostic and to be able to just run, not on a Windows platform. That's a goal of a lot of them. And so there's a lot of work going on there right now, but there's a lot of work to be done too.
So we're getting close to the end, but I'd like two things, and then certainly more interaction. But so it's not just a pep rally for video in the cloud is wonderful, yay rah, everything's awesome. What are in a nutshell, what are the things that would say, if you see these 1, 2, 3, or 4 factors, look somewhere other than cloud today or find a workaround? What are the red flags to start with?
No bandwidth.
Okay.
That's
Ditto.
I'll get the easy one.
I mean, I'm ready for a yell practice if we're ready to go, but...
No, there's no bandwidth, obviously, really poor or really intermittent bandwidth, obviously. But the other one is sometimes there's just, for whatever reason, there's a policy that they don't want to use cloud. And part of that, honestly, I think is an education issue. I really believe that's going to become less and less of a problem as people really understand that, wait a minute, they do have the certifications I need. The data is safe. It's not an issue with PII. It is encrypted. All the things that we all worry about, most of them have been very nicely solved at this point. So.
Regulatory issues.
Regulatory.
There you go.
Yeah, I called on a guy at LCR, at Lower Colorado River Authority, one day, and he's like, I can't even plug in a USB on my computer and walk out of it. So sorry. I was like, okay, I got it. Yep.
Lack of IT buy-in.
Lack of IT buy-in, yeah.
What happened?
Rumor has it they're involved.
No, you're right. You get some IT people going, wait a minute, if they're moving this off-site, that's my kingdom's getting smaller. So that's, for sure.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just understanding the motivation. Why do they want to move to cloud? If you're presenting this to them and they've never considered it, it's helping them understand what the benefits are for something like that. But really that motivation, why do you want to move to cloud, is because the IT group showed up yesterday and told you need to. Does that meet your need? Do you understand how to operate in that type of environment before we just put it all up there and try to prevent creating more issues than solving the issue, right? So
there's one other issue. I'm really surprised it hasn't come up, so I'll make it really quick. But artificial intelligence, AI, one of the reasons, it's the reverse, I'm sorry, but one of the reasons you have to at least consider the cloud is there are literally hundreds of microservices in the cloud these days. So meaning if you're going to, let's just assume some of your data is going to go to the cloud for some reason. I think that's safe to say. If it's there, why not use some of these services to do something intelligent that actually add more value to your data? I guarantee, it's happening at breakneck speed right now, based on people like NVIDIA and others, as we all know. There's a lot going on in that space. So just keep in mind, going to the cloud is great because it's safe. You can do DR really quickly, but it's also important because you can allow somebody to add more value to their data if it's sitting in the cloud with a lot of these AI microservices. And that's going to become more and more prevalent, no question.
Excellent. Yes.
May I say also, for several of our clients, the budgetary constraints, so they may have a CapEx available at the beginning of the project. They don't have anything for an OpEx type solution that would be needing to deal with this, and I'm happy to hear that about the terabyte a month is impressive.
Yeah,
I
and-
went across that.
And that's, yeah,
But
go ahead.
the question relating to that OpEx versus CapEx, money availability, and the low cost for long-term storage, but are there other ways to play that game in our last couple of minutes, just as closing thoughts, where you can address that money issue?
Yeah, we've helped end users by structuring that in a multi-year contract, right? So if they got a big chunk of money up front, why don't you buy multiple years, and then you don't have to worry about it for 5 years, and you can put an OpEx plan together. And often that will help with cost of that migration as well. And they can update some other technologies that they want to take advantage of, because maybe the cost of the cloud solution is lower. So now let's go upgrade some of those cameras that are out there as well and take advantage of that.
Yeah, and then the other side of that is influencing that end user to change their mindset about their video. Think of it as just the other utilities that they pay month by month. So maybe it does start out as a CapEx cost. K through 12 is a big one. They get bond money. Take care of them that first time, start educating them on, hey, let's just put a line item in your budget moving forward that you're going to pay X number of dollars a month for your video surveillance system. So,
Well, they're going to be doing that if they keep their licenses up anyway.
Right, they've got software support costs that they've got to address.
They keep their licenses
If they
up.
keep.
Right, yep.
Yeah, paying for license support, you pay for it when you subscribe.
yeah, so with the other subscription model, that's already kind of covered in there. And then we have, Eagle Eye specifically has some ways of maybe doing some technology refreshes every 6 years if they go, there's subscription models to do that as well. So they're not stuck with a 10-year-old camera, so they can get that technology, that newer technology available.
So with the 2 minutes left, ask everyone to, Lance, start with you, with what are your top 2 or 3 things, walk away, last message for the group before we close?
Make sure you know the workflow, what the expectations really are, and at least consider the cloud for where it makes sense, right? Because there really are some very good advantages these days. It's a lot better than it used to be, and there are a lot more options out there. So it's worth taking a look.
I'm going to go a little more salesy, so look for a system that's camera agnostic, pay for what you need, and I had one other one too. That's it.
Okay.
Pay for only what you need.
Yeah, and I would just say, there's no one right solution, right? And so work together with the end user, work together with the integrator, come up with a design that makes a lot of sense for them, but just know that it's not all pure cloud, it's not hybrid, it's not on-prem, it's whatever the end user needs. Just help to increase that line of communications all the way through to the folks that are putting the system in, so that we make sure we deliver what you intended.
Excellent. Well, I got, for our final metric, did you guys have a good time?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we're successful up here. Did y'all choose to win, Larry? Good.